Hi, I'm Robbie Bobby, grateful member of ACA. The title of this video is 12 Ways to Look at the 14 Traits, Part 4. This is the final video in the 4-part series. If you have not seen parts 1, 2, or 3, please look for them on my YouTube channel. We'll start with number 10 on the list, which addresses the concept of a we program. So the first 12 steps start with the word we. We became isolated, we became approval seekers, we became addicted to excitement, etc. The intention of starting the traits with the word we is to make you realize that you are not the only one with these traits. We implies the entire ACA fellowship. In other words, all other fellow travelers. However, sometimes we read words without attaching meaning, especially if you're focused more on the other words. It's easy to focus on the heart of the trait and mentally skip over the we. So I think it's a good practice to occasionally go through the traits and focus on the word we and let it sink in. I also think it's good practice to occasionally go through the traits and substitute in the word I. I became isolated. I became an approval seeker. I judge myself harshly, etc. I do this because when you get used to the word we, it's easy to lose track that I am included in the we. Denial can easily creep in and make me think this applies more to everyone else. They became isolated. They became approval seekers. So I need to occasionally remind myself that I most definitely have these traits, and so do my fellow travelers. Recently, I was going through the traits while looking at a picture of my 5-year-old self, 5-year-old little Robbie. This framed picture was part of an exercise in the ACA Loving Parent Guidebook, and it's been on my desk since then, for at least 2 years. During this time, I've gone through the traits hundreds of times, but never while looking into the eyes of little Robbie. As I did, something unexpected and very powerful happened. The we became me and little Robbie. I realized that he had these traits too. In fact, he developed them. This made me realize on a deep level that we are both in this together. Therefore, I continued with the Tony A steps, which are the solution to the traits, while looking into the eyes of little Robbie and imagining that we were taking these steps together. It was one of the most powerful experiences that I've had in the ACA program. This brings us to number 11 on the list, which is what effect do the Tony A steps have on the traits, specifically in terms of healing the wounds that created them. You can start by having a list of the 14 traits and a list of the 12 Tony A steps in front of you. Next, read trait 1, and then slowly read through all 12 Tony A steps and try to imagine their effect, or simply acknowledge the trait in the context of the steps, or the steps in the context of the individual trait, as if all steps are there to address that one trait. Repeat this for each trait. The key is to do it with an open mind and to go where it leads you. In particular, I like to look at the traits through the lens of step 1, which we've already gone over in part 3. But the basics are to admit that I am powerless over each trait individually. Also, to see how each trait can make my life unmanageable. The rest of the steps have more to do with the healing side of things. Although when you look at it, step 1 is the first step of healing. Step 2 talks about practicing self-love, as well as a higher power bringing us clarity. Step 6 and 7 mention a healing process. Several other steps mention unconditional love from our higher power, as well as accepting our own, which is the highest level of self-love. I like to look at each trait and ask the questions, what effect does clarity have on this trait? What effect does unconditional love have on this trait? What is the healing process for this trait? According to the Tony A steps, it's love in all its forms. As an example, I'll use trait 11, which says we judge ourselves harshly and have a very low sense of self-esteem. Okay, when I think of this trait in relation to step 1, I can see how these negative thoughts happen frequently and automatically. I can't prevent them from happening. Therefore, I am powerless. Furthermore, when I believe that they're true, I can give up without even trying, which is one of the many forms of unmanageability. Okay, I then consider what effect clarity may have on this trait. That's step 2. Well, judging myself harshly is a form of distorted thinking. The antidote for distorted thinking is seeing things clearly. To see that the negative thoughts are false. What about self-love? How does that help? I think it's clear to see that self-love is the antidote for self-hate. And trait 11 is all about self-hate. But there are 2 ways that I look at this. One is to bring in self-love as quickly as possible after recognizing the negative self-talk. The other is to practice self-love on a daily basis as a preventative measure to ward off negative thinking in the first place. And if I struggle with self-love, it's probably because I feel unloved and unlovable, another form of distorted thinking. So it may help to start with opening myself to receive the unconditional love of my higher power, step 8, so that I may in turn love myself, step 9. We became willing to accept our own unconditional love by understanding that our higher power loves us unconditionally. By the way, the word love is mentioned 6 times in the Tony A steps, which is a beautiful thing, but don't forget that it must be integrated with the traits. This is the solution. I've come up with a prayer to help me to do this. The idea or inspiration for the prayer came about by recognizing that the traits were merely symptoms of my unhealed childhood wounds, that each trait pointed to a different wounded part of myself that needed love in order to heal. In its simplest form, the prayer goes like this: God, please help me to love the wounded parts of myself so that I may heal. However, the prayer really comes alive when I integrate it with the individual traits. And this is the final way I look at the traits, number 12, by asking God to help me to heal each trait by loving myself. So if you were looking at a list of the traits, it would go something like this: God, please help me to love the wounded part of myself that needs to isolate so that it can heal. God, please help me to love the wounded part of myself that needs external approval so that it can heal, and so on down the list. And since the word love can be an abstract idea for many ACAs, I repeat the prayer and substitute in the components of love, which include acceptance, forgiveness, patience, kindness, and compassion. It sounds like this: God, please help me to accept the wounded part of myself that needs to isolate so that it can heal. God, please help me to forgive the wounded part of myself that judges itself harshly so that it can heal. God, please help me to be patient with the wounded part of myself that confuses love with pity so that it may heal. God, please help me to be kind to the wounded part of myself that is addicted to excitement so that it may heal. And God, please help me to bring compassion to the wounded part of myself that needs external approval so that it can heal. If I react with disgust, anger, or even indifference to my traits, they will not heal. I believe that this is precisely where I need to direct my own unconditional love, by understanding that my higher power loves these parts as well. For ACA recovery, self-love is not an option. It's an absolute requirement. This concludes 12 ways to look at the 14 traits. I hope you got something from it. If you did, please click the like button and the subscribe button. Also, check out some of my other videos. I'm Robbie Bobby. Thank you for listening. And as always, keep coming back.